I'm excited to have you on the show, both because you've been a great friend and ally, both to me and to the animals, but also because I have never actually really gotten a chance to ask you some very important questions, including how the hell a former NPR journalist who was by all means a reputable person got entrapped by me in this crazy terrorism that I've no, obviously I don't think this is terrorism, but I am kind of curious. I mean, you used to be a host at NPR in both, I think it was Alabama, right, and in North Carolina, and you
Mhm.
went from there to working with me in these criminal trials defending rescue. So how did you go from kind of the mainstream media to a bunch of animal rights vagabonds? Like, what was the journey for you?
Well, that journey was, one that first started with veganism. So anyway, I should, clarify, like I worked for public radio. I was a host and reporter for various public radio stations, mostly across the Southeast and in Alabama and North Carolina, mostly in North Carolina. Um, yeah, I parted ways with my radio station about 6 years ago, and at that time, I even told you about this. I struggled with battling NPR culture for quite a while. In fact, I have a lot of grievances, you might say, about just journalism in general, the media in general, what they choose to cover, what they don't choose to cover. So I struggled a lot over the years, honestly. So yeah, I had a long 15-year career with public radio, and a lot of times it was spent kind of battling with my radio stations over what to cover. So that was kind of exhausting, and it culminated in me parting ways with public radio. And during that time period, that was like a year of change for me. I even like intentionally made it a year of reinvention. That's when I went vegan. That's when I started to get into animal rights. So, I mean, I could fill in that story quite a bit, but to make it short, you ended up coming to North Carolina because you had rescued a goat. And that's how I got to know you. So I already knew of you. I had seen your Science of Change video and
Hmm.
I was already very fond of you and very fond of anybody who fights for animals. So when I learned that you were going to be facing trial in North Carolina, just about 20 minutes from where I live, I just had to be there,
Hmm.
just to show support, at the very least. So that's where it all started. I mean, I just started to come to your trial. Um, and for me, I was kind of disappointed because we have a lot of activists in North Carolina. And granted, your trial was taking place during the week, so it was difficult for people to come out, but not a lot of people showed up. And I thought that was disappointing that the vast majority of the people who were there to show you support were people from Berkeley,
Hmm.
the XC friends. And so
Or the
I gained a
places
lot.
across the country. There were a lot of people who came from, Chicago, New York, all sorts of other cities. You're right, though. There weren't a lot of North Carolina people there.
That's true. And I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody from North Carolina. I just wish we would have showed up in greater numbers to support you.
Yeah.
So, but that was also a chance for me to gain, a lot of admiration for how you conducted yourself during that trial and how the people of DXC conducted themselves. I should say direct action everywhere for the one or two people who don't know what we're
Who don't know what
talking
that is.
about. Yeah. Um, so yeah, that was my first foray into DXC land. And then, I got branded, I joined the cult and
There you
went through
go.
the initiation.
And now you chant my name before an effigy every night, right?
I do,
There's a
and you
there's a
check in,
life-size model
make
of me.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
discipline if you don't chant my name in front of the life-size model of me in your bedroom.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the wild stuff people believe. I wonder if these two strands of leaving NPR and joining kind of the quote unquote radical animal rights movement might have been related to one another because, and honestly, even the fact that the people in North Carolina didn't know much about this trial might be related to the same problem and question, which is, have you heard about all the crisis at NPR unfolding in the last few months?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of
So the New York
course.
Times had
Yeah.
this great piece about it, and just saying NPR's audience has dropped massively in the last few years. It's unbelievable how much it's dropped. And a lot of it has to do with the fact they're just not reporting on stuff that actually matters. They're repeating the same nonsense that everyone in the mainstream media repeats and thinks they're going to get an audience. And that's just not the way things work anymore. You cannot just repeat the same drivel everyone's saying on NBC, ABC, the New York Times, and expect to find an audience.
Mhm.
And maybe part of the reason that the folks in North Carolina didn't know anything about the trial was because a lot of the local outlets have been just repeating the mainstream media mantra over and over again. So they just didn't even know about
Yeah.
important subjects like the fact that little baby animals are being left to starve to death and die of pneumonia and coccidia, even in so-called small family farms. Because Western North Carolina and Nashville are the height of humane meat. There's so many people who believe in regenerative agriculture
Humane meat.
and like
Yep.
family farms and all this stuff, and they don't know that even in the best circumstances, which the goat meat farm that I rescued Lenny and Rain from was probably the best farm I've ever been to. But even in the best circumstances, I mean, we found Lenny collapsed on the ground right next to his own feces, which is unnatural. That's not supposed to happen. Covered in lice and suffering from a disease called coccidia that wasn't just dangerous to him, but dangerous to all the other animals at the farm. And no one was doing anything about it, as far as we could tell. And
Yeah.
this is a story. People should know this in the same way they should know about human violence and suffering. And yet NPR wasn't covering those sorts of stories.
Yeah. And, I should say, I've met some of the greatest people that I've ever met in public radio. So there's amazing people working at NPR and in public radio. I mean, I just had a conversation with my old news director the other day, and it was just so good to hear his voice. I mean, this is like
Really?
high quality character person.
Hmm.
So you meet some of the best people. It's just what I'm talking about is more this culture and this culture of sort of timidity. And
Hmm.
there are brave people at NPR, but there's also this sort of culture that prevents it. Um, yeah, and I didn't see the New York Times article you're referring to, but I knew about the NPR controversy, and that was one of my gripes at NPR was, NPR headquarters based in DC, and so much of their reporting is basically just reporting what the New York Times reported
Times
or
wrote.
what the
Yeah.
Washington Post reported. So many of their reports start with the New York
Yeah.
Times reported. And I'm like, you have this great team there in DC, go do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really do think that NPR is a good, it's like one of the best media sources that we have, but that's an indictment because I don't think NPR is actually a good media source. Because I spent 15 years at NPR and didn't know the first thing about animal agriculture. Not one thing, and I was a reporter. So that's actually one of my major beefs, vegan beefs with NPR is just the failure to report on animal agriculture. And when they do, it's really always from the perspective of the farmer. Now, I will say I did actually get my radio station to cover your trial. And actually that was one of the the funnest parts about that trial was
Mm-hmm.
that I had just recently been fired by my radio station in Asheville. And yet it was pretty recent. I battled with them for quite a bit. So the firing wasn't that surprising, but I was still friends with a lot of people at the station. And so essentially I was feeding them copy and then they were reading it. And then the people who had fired me were reading my copy on the air. I was kind of tickled by that. And then it actually impacted the trial somewhat because when we were in jury selection, well, when you were in jury, I was sitting in the audience. Several people mentioned
Said
hearing
they
about
heard
the
it on
trial.
NPR.
They
Yeah,
did.
that's true.
So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize you were the one who pitched that story. That's awesome.
Yeah. I just fed them the copy. And,
Yeah.
it was a good friend of mine who I won't name, who is, one of the hosts over there. And
Hmm.
I mean, what I loved about working at NPR is a lot of these smaller stations. Like I've worked at big stations and small stations. And when you worked at small stations, you had a lot of leeway over what you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And you could get things on the air, like, if you had like this animal rights case going on. But, since then I've had a lot of trouble. I've been working with Direct Action Everywhere's press team. And when I started working with them, I kind of overpromised because I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I'll be able to get us on NPR all the time. And I haven't delivered. And
Hmm.
the reason I haven't delivered is because NPR is not interested.
Yeah.
And the reporters they treat controversial topics. And this is the problem that I'm talking about. tough issues go through so much more scrutiny at NPR than fluff. So,
Yeah.
for instance, and this is again not to call anybody out, but when we had this recent Ridglan trial, we were set to have a really good piece in Wisconsin Public Radio, and when the charges were dropped, they killed the piece.
Yeah.
And I sent them an email, and I was basically saying, first, you're letting one side dictate your coverage. You've already done all this work. The people of Wisconsin don't know what's happening to dogs, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. And that's on you. That's your job. You need to be telling people what's going on. And that same day that they told us they're not going to run the story, I looked at their website and I saw all this fluff.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how much scrutiny did this story
that no
get?
one cares about. Yeah.
Exactly. That people don't need.
Yeah. I mean, it's no surprise when you are just publishing the same derivative fluff that everyone else is publishing that your audience declines from 60 million to 40 million in the course of 5 to 10 years. Do you know this guy, Dan Charles, by chance? Have I ever mentioned his name?
I don't. It's not ringing any bells right now.
Yeah, Dan Charles is the national reporter on food and agricultural stuff at NPR. And we have pitched him for years because he's always writing about agriculture and he's always writing about factory farming in various ways. But what you said about NPR not willing to take any story that's a little bit different than anyone else is very true, because Dan Charles reporting, he's never even replied to one of our pitches. And, we've had stories in the New York Times, the Washington Post, we've had stories that have gone mega viral, in some cases, tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of people reading them, with the FBI raids of sanctuaries. I mean, that was a story that was shared on Facebook alone 130,000 times. We pitched that story to NPR. NPR didn't even respond. This is a story that ends up blowing up. Every single columnist. I mean, we have state senators in Utah, Republicans tweeting about it. We have Ezra Klein, who, we had never been exposed to. That's actually my first exposure. My first contact with Ezra Klein, the New York Times columnist, was because he saw Glenn Greenwald's story about the FBI raids of a sanctuary in Colorado in an attempt to retrieve the piglets we rescued from a farm in Utah. And Dan Charles didn't even respond. And I'm sure he's a good guy. I mean, his reporting is good. I've listened to his interviews. I've seen some of his reporting, but it is exactly the same stuff that everyone else reports. So, for example, to the extent he writes negatively about factory farming, it's only about the climate consequences. And only then, after all the mainstream environmental groups started talking about it and everyone else started writing about it, then we saw peace in NPR. And it's like, if you're not going to do brave reporting, what the hell is the point? I don't understand that at all. And I mean, and even and especially for NPR, because NPR is a nonprofit. I can kind of understand the people who are based on advertising to say, oh, we can't go too far because one of our advertisers might get pissed, including even the New York Times. The New York Times makes a lot of money from their subscribers, but our first story at the New York Times exposed Whole Foods, and Whole Foods was running, at the time, I think the single largest advertising campaign in the New York Times history. They spent like $20 million on an ad buy. So you can kind of understand the for-profit company saying, ooh, this is a little too hot for us. But NPR is a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit.
I know. Yeah. And
so why do you think they can't be brave? I don't understand it.
It's a weird culture thing, because so many of the boots on the ground are brave, intrepid reporters. Like, I've met just amazing people. I was just thinking about this the other day. I had this friend, Marina, not the Marina that you and I know. Marina Giovanelli, I think her last name is. She was a reporter in Wilmington with me, and she's actually gone on to do great things. She works for The World. I'm not sure if she's still there, but I've lost touch with her. But I just remember being in a bar with her, and we were talking about Hunter Thompson and how, that was someone that I looked up to as a kid, just because of the sort of the brave reporting. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of been caricatured because of Fear and Loathing as this kind of drug hippie kind of guy. But actually, a lot of his reporting was kind of serious reporting, but just done very entertainingly. And we were just talking about how fucking brave he is. And that was what Marina was like. And that's what so many people that I've met over the years are like. And so I want to be careful that I'm not just throwing NPR under the bus, because there are amazing people working there. But I do think there's a problem. And I think it's systemic. It's systemic not just at NPR, but in our entire media landscape. I mean, we were just doing an interview the other day. You were talking about Kristi Noem and how, the media is up in arms over her shooting her dog, which they should be. But this is coming right on the heels of the Ridglan trial. Thousands of dogs being tortured to death daily, and we couldn't get anybody to cover it. Yeah. I mean, we did. We got some people to cover it, but
not nearly as much as should have happened.
Not CNN and not NPR. I mean,
she shot one dog in the face, but the policies that the Trump administration and frankly the Biden administration too have been supporting have led tens of thousands of dogs to not just get shot in the face, but to be force-fed laundry detergent, to be, surgically mutilated to the point that their faces are falling apart, to be injected with rabies by large pharmaceutical companies. And one of the big problems is when there's a bipartisan consensus. I think people are happy to go after someone when they're seen as an adversary of my team. But when it seems like a bigger systemic problem that we're all a part of, the one silver lining in all this is I think articles like Glenn Greenwald's article in The Intercept about the Lilly raid are showing that there is an appetite for that sort of journalism. And if someone went out there and pointed out the absurdity of getting so upset, which, I mean, people should get upset about Kristi Noem shooting her dog, but the absurdity of the media pointing out so much of a concern about one dog, Cricket, being shot, while ignoring the fact that Julie and tens of thousands of other dogs were suffering far more torture, there's actually an audience for that. But journalists just aren't doing it, which is why we see independent media and YouTube rising so much.
They're scared.
They're scared. Hard. Yeah, I think you're right. They're scared.
They're scared. They're also ignorant. I mean, I was ignorant. I wouldn't have known. Like, I just didn't know. And I think the one of the disappointing things for me has been after knowing, like, I mean, James Aspie expressed this disappointment of like, I thought people would respond to the message differently. One of the first things that I did after I watched Earthlings and I saw how horrible it is and just became like an activist basically on day one. But one of the first things I did was I was on that Daily Coast blog, which is like a liberal blog that has some pretty good blog writing on there. Mm-hmm. One of the first things I did was just to go on there and post the film Dominion, which is like Earthlings 2, basically. And I got banned from that website after like a few hours when people were responding in there with such defensiveness. And my response kept being, watch the film, just watch the film. And so they sent me this message that was like, I think you need to cool off a little. Wow. You can't just berate people to watch a movie on here or something like that. So I got banned from that website. And it was just so disappointing because these are so-called progressive people. Like, you would think we'd want to challenge ourselves. We'd want to learn new things. But so many people I've found, and not to make this political, because both sides do this, all sides do this. But I mean, people on the left, I find they want to believe that they're already so good. They want to pat themselves on the back. And that's another thing that I saw at NPR a lot, was just this belief that, we can't, it's not like we could be doing anything wrong. We're progressives.
Yeah, we're NPR, we're the nonprofit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we stand for gay rights and women's rights and immigrants' rights. And it's funny because that controversy that you referenced, which was like an article that's like, I saw a story, it was like NPR in turmoil over claims that it's over its liberal bias. I was just laughing at that headline. Like, NPR has been seen as liberal forever. Like, how is this a crisis? That's exactly what they're.
That's not different.
Like, my gripes with NPR, they're not progressive enough because they're happy to wear the label, but some of this reporting requires hard work and bravery, and it may require going into a factory farm or following Wayne Hsiung, on a rescue. And, that's not happening. It needs to happen.
Yeah, I think the problem with NPR, like a lot of the liberal media, is it's performatively progressive. It's progressive in exactly the same way that everyone else is. And it's just following the mob, whatever it thinks the mob is. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't work because people can see through it. Even your own internal stakeholders can see what you're doing and realize this is kind of nonsense. We don't actually believe what we're even saying. We're not reporting anything that's genuine or raw or emotional in a real way. We're reporting things that feel very safe. And you're right. Hunter S. Thompson was the opposite of this. He was a brave journalist. And do you know, I mean, you know, one of his most famous articles was condemning the Kentucky Derby. Like, imagine,
That's
I think
right.
this is
That's
written
right.
in 1970. 1970. Peter Singer had not even written Animal Liberation at this point. And granted, it wasn't mostly focused on the animals. It was just focused on the depravity of the entire situation, how
Yes.
ridiculous and
Yeah.
absurd this entire spectacle is. But if I recall correctly, he does talk about the horses too. I'd have to reread the article. I
Wow.
think I read it a long time ago.
I
But
completely forgot that, but you're right.
It's an article
Yeah.
called "The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved," and it is. It absolutely is.
Yes.
And there hasn't been enough attention to this. And to think that he wrote that in 1970 was incredibly controversial. A lot of people pushed back and were upset about it. But he was willing to do things that were actually brave, that would upset people because they were true, at least for him. You know, for him, they were true. And so many journalists now, instead of saying things they think they actually believe, are just saying things they think they should say because of some progressive, performative, liberal mainstream sentiment on whether it's race or gender or even animals. Like, you're allowed to say certain things about factory farms. You're not allowed to say others. So, for example, you're allowed to say, oh, you know, it's so unfortunate animals are mistreated on the factory farms. You're not allowed to say, we just need to abolish this entirely. Like, if you actually think that animals are moral beings who deserve moral consideration, guess what? There's no way to do this at all that's ethical. The entire system's just got to go. And they're all terrified to even speculate about that.
And you know, another thing that they're terrified about is this liberal label. And that's one of the things that stops them. You quoted, I didn't know this quote, but in one of our interviews, you said Glenn Greenwald basically said, look, I have biases. I just tell you what they are. And that's how I report. I didn't know that. And that to me, that is so much more honest than sitting there in an interview. One of my interviews I did was with this woman named Tami Fitzgerald, who's this like God family group, this very anti-gay group. And I'm not going to sit there during an interview and pretend like I don't find this abhorrent. So I actually, when I look back, I feel like when I listen to that interview, I'm like, I actually did a good job of hiding it. But there is some contempt in my voice at some point because she's talking about trans people as though they have a disease. And and that needs to be pushed back on, stuff like that. And to push back on that admits that you have a bias. And so be it. You know, like, just do it. Like, this fear over appearing too far to the left or too far to the right just creates like really false reporting.
Yeah, you're right. Did you by chance see the Don Lemon interview of Elon Musk? Did you hear about this?
No.
It's good. You should watch it. By the way, you should send me. I want to hear that interview to Tami Fitzgerald because now I'm really curious and I want to hear it. And maybe we can put it in the show notes too. But so Don Lemon did this really controversial interview with Elon Musk because Elon had actually, in his company X, you know, formerly Twitter, now called X, had signed a deal with Don Lemon to have a show that was going to be sponsored by Twitter. And his first interview was going to be with Elon. And then Elon canceled the contract at Don Lemon right after, which I thought was kind of bogus and showed how fragile and how much of a snowflake Elon is. But I will also say that I thought Elon had a point about the interview because when you watch the interview, it's really interesting because it illustrates the point you were trying to make, which is Don Lemon clearly has a bias, but he tries to clothe it in this weird objectivity. Like, I am just a CNN journalist and I'm asking you objective questions. It's like, no, you would have been better off if you just said, you know what, I kind of think you're a scumbag. You say you're about free speech and you cancel people all the time. So can you tell me about that? Like, how do you possibly defend that? Instead, he says things like, Mr. Musk, you are a executive at a company that believes in free speech. Can you, I mean, it's just, it's very performative and it's not a conversation and it's not him showing his actual cards. And it feels very cringy as a result. And this is why people are moving to YouTube because they just see these stupid interviews that people are doing and know this is all, I mean, even to the person doing this interview, it is bullshit. And people are tired of bullshit. It is total bullshit. Yes, it's total bullshit. So and you should watch the interview. I'd be interested in your take on it. You should watch the interview.
And I should say, what NPR is trying to do is a noble, lofty goal to have non-biased reporting that is ultimately what you want. It's just that in doing it, you're lying. You're you know, and that's just creating this really strange. Or also, okay, you're either lying or the people reporting don't care enough.
Yeah.
because I encountered that a lot too, where it's like people who just like go through the motions and they actually don't really care about any of these issues. And
Mm.
that to me is very problematic.
Yeah,
And
that's kind of sick, honestly, because they
yeah,
pretend to care and they don't. That's the sick part.
well, and like you can't be reporting on atrocity or discrimination or bigotry or whatever and pretend like you don't have a
Don't care.
position on that. And if you don't have a position on that, what's wrong with you? So I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, and one thing that I encountered, and I won't name the person because they're actually an amazing reporter.
Mm.
But I witness a lot of, probably what we do as activists too is just like kind of deflecting using humor when you're talking about something horrible,
Yeah.
as like a defense mechanism to get through it. But I think that creates like a callousness because we may be reporting on like a murder or something, and behind the scenes, we're like trying not to feel that sensation. That's part of what I'm talking about, this kind of hiding the bias that
Yeah.
happens also in just trying to like deflect. And I'm not really articulating this well, but
Yeah.
there was a thread there that was in my brain just a minute ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
you're making a really important point. There's this book by a very prominent British philosopher named Jonathan Glover. And I think the title of the book, I'm looking it up right now. I think it's called Humanity, A Moral History of the 20th Century. And he
mhm,
basically studies all of the atrocities of the 20th century, obviously the Holocaust, but also things like the mass murder of people in China by the Red Guard, the Stalinist purges in the 1940s and 50s, where he murdered basically anyone who disagreed with him.
yeah.
All sorts of horrible atrocities, the internment of Japanese people in the United States during World War II. And one of the things he finds is that atrocities often happen in part because an entire class of people develops what he calls cold jokes. There are these situations where you might have empathy, you might feel some vicarious suffering because of some horrible thing that's happening to another person, a Jew, a Japanese person, whatever it is. And you tell a cold joke that makes you all laugh and distracts you and deflects you from the empathy you might otherwise feel. And when that's systematized, it literally allows for atrocity. There's so
Yes.
many like Nazi guards who they'd see starving children and people being gassed to death and just joke about it and say like, oh, we got another 1,000 this week. Who's going to work more productively, you or me, Johnny? Johnny, are you going to do a better job of killing people than me this week? And they chuckle about it and say like, oh, this is so funny. And I think you're right that even as activists, sometimes we do this. Like, and you understand why people do it because when there's so much suffering and when you feel guilty potentially about what you've done, and even as animal rights activists, I mean, I feel guilty almost every day about not doing enough to help the animals, about the animals I've left behind. And sometimes you just joke about it. I was actually joking about something this morning with somebody from Animal Rising, and I said, "Oh, was this like too dark of a joke?" The joke was I said, "Hey, we should go to factory farms and hold up a sign that says free rescue and just tell factory farms, we'll rescue your animals for free. You don't even have to pay us, like, because it costs so much to care for all the sick and dying animals. Wouldn't it be hilarious if we went to a factory farm and held a sign that said free rescue? All you have to do is let us know and we'll come and rescue your animals for free." But it's kind of funny. It's a terrible joke. But the point is, it does to a certain extent weaken the darkness of the situation. And yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that at all, because sometimes you have to joke around just to survive that darkness. Because I mean, we can't have this just be gloom and doom. But one paradigm I found really helpful about humor is there's this guy Mike White who's a very famous screenwriter. He's written a lot of really great movies, comedies. He's a comedian and a screenwriter, and he wrote a movie called School of Rock, among others, which is legit one of the best movies I've ever seen. Like School of Rock, everyone should go see it. Have you seen it?
I don't think so. Is that
Jack
that's not the
Black.
Jack Black? Oh, it is the Jack Black.
Yeah, it's so
See,
good.
you have terrible taste in movies. Yeah,
You
I
don't like
mean,
it? I don't know if we
well,
can be friends anymore, man.
okay, I don't remember it, but I mean, just the fact that you would put that up there at the top. Come on now.
Jack Black. No, okay.
Yeah.
So okay. Yeah, I get it because Jack Black is ridiculous and stupid in so many movies. This is a really heartfelt movie that has like deep moral themes to it. It's all about, appreciating the underdogs and standing up for what's right and doing what you believe in. It's like really powerful themes. But
Yeah, yeah.
and Mike White, what else did Mike White write? Mike White, he's a really cool guy. Mike White, screenwriter. What else did he write? Uh, hmm,
That's not
okay,
the
I can't
Beavis
find
and
it.
Butthead, is it? Oh no, that's Mike
I
Judge. Yeah.
he wrote he wrote Nacho Libre too. What else did he write? Year of the Dog. Year of the Dog is an amazing movie as well. All right. Well,
Mm-hmm.
anyways. Oh, Pitch Perfect 3. Obviously, you got to
Mm-hmm.
Pitch Perfect 3. No, but but Mike White, he did an interview. Actually, it was an NPR interview. He did an interview with Terry Gross. What is her show called?
Fresh Air.
Fresh Air. That's right. That's a great interview show, by the way. I love that show.
It is.
Um,
It is.
yeah, she's a really good
Terry.
interviewer.
Yeah, Terry is one of the real ones. I mean,
Yeah, she's brave. I agree. She does like
yeah,
controversial subjects all the time. It's great.
yeah. I don't recall any animal rights subjects, but I could see her doing it.
Actually, yeah, you're right. Why hasn't Terry done an animal rights subject? She'd probably
I'm
do
not
it. You're right.
sure. I'm
You
not,
should pitch
and
her.
I'm not sure. Maybe she has. I have no idea.
I feel like I would know because I used to follow Fresh Air a lot and listen to the radio show and podcast. But anyways, Mike White is on our show and he says there's a difference between two types of humor. And there's one type of humor that fundamentally liberates and one type of humor that fundamentally oppresses. And that's the difference between the humor of the bullied and the humor of the bully. And he's basically critiquing modern comedy. And this is back in like 2008 when he did this, but it was, I don't remember what the big comedies, but a lot of the comedies were like who's that guy who's a big comedy guy who's made all these movies? Jed, you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, Apatow, Judd Apatow?
Jed Apatow? Jed Apatow.
Judd Apatow.
Judd
Yeah.
Apatow. So most of Judge Apatow's movies are like basically making fun of people, you know, humiliating someone and humiliating someone who's weaker, someone who's stupid. Or at least this is the way Mike White portrayed it. I haven't actually seen that many Judd Apatow movies, so I could be wrong and Mike White could be wrong. But he basically critiqued this genre of comedy and said, this genre of comedy basically makes light of the suffering and the humiliation, the oppression of people. And the type of comedy I believe in and the type of comedy that I think can be liberating is comedy that basically makes fun of ourselves. It pokes fun at power. Instead of poking fun at the powerless, we poke fun at power. And we poke fun of ourselves first and foremost. In all of Mike White's movies, like School of Rock, Year of the Dog, I forgot, Year of the Dog is such a good movie too. Oh my God. You've got to watch that movie. It's an animal rights movie. You'll love it.
Okay, yeah.
I swear to God, you will love that movie. It's Molly, who's that famous SNL person? Molly, damn. Molly Shannon.
Yeah.
Molly Shannon. It's basically about her. It's actually very similar to you. It's like about her radicalization experience from being like a relatively normal, I guess my story too, because I never had like.
We've all been radicalized, I guess.
Yeah, I had like a mainstream job, but it was all fake for me. I was not actually in it for, I mean, I didn't, like, I knew I was an animal rights activist and I was just making money to do animal rights activism. But Molly Shannon.
Which is a noble thing to do, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and some people got to do it. There's some people who, I do think it's relatively rare. I think some people just making money for the animals is a good thing. But given that I think we have such a human capital constraint and we need so many more people who are smart and talented and motivated to work directly for the animals, my view is most people who have some talent should be pursuing direct work for animals. And most famously, I gave this advice to Sam Bankman-Fried in 2013, and he ignored my advice, and now he's in prison.
Well,
that's really
mean.
I shouldn't say that.
He should have listened. Yeah.
I swear to God, I gave him this advice, and he didn't. He listened to Will McCaskill instead, and he ended up finding FTX and going to prison. But yeah, Mike White is the progenitor of this style of comedy, and it's so good. Like it's because it's not just hilarious; it's like healing for the soul when you watch his movies.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, watch Year of the Dog and tell me what you think.
I will. I don't recall what he's talking about with Judd Apatow, but I don't remember his films all that well because it's been so long. Like he was, but the point that you made about like making it easier to deal with certain things. Well, so I was just watching an interview with Vegan Gains did. I like Vegan Gains, and he interviewed this German activist called the Militant Vegan. It's just this very, ballsy activist. And she was talking about the book Eternal Treblinka, which I thought I had read, but apparently I hadn't read it. So I'm reading it right now. And they're talking about how, like one of the quotes I just read right before doing this interview was, someone asking a Nazi basically, you're already going to kill all these Jews. What's the point of the humiliation? The degradation that you're doing to them. And he said that it's to make it easier for the
Yeah.
officers to kill them. And I mean, so the whole point of this first chapter was just talking about how
Yeah.
we've used throughout history talk about humans in animal terms, which forebodes oftentimes a massacre,
Yeah.
um, because we've now placed them on the scale of animals who we abuse to such an extent that it's the largest Holocaust that ever happened. Um, so yeah, I mean, this kind of making light of atrocities could be actually dangerous too.
Yeah.
In the example that I gave, it wasn't. But my point more when I was talking about my news reporter was that I do think that oftentimes this person, who is a very compassionate person, was disassociating her own feelings
Thanks. Wow.
from what she was reporting on, and I think that's bad. I don't think you should
Yeah.
do that because again, it just gets back to honesty and also just kind of almost condoning. It's kind of like both sidesing something.
Yeah.
When things should be called out. You mentioned Don Lemon, and it's weird because to me, Don Lemon and CNN reporters, like during the Trump years, were very, very powerfully open about how against Trump they were. And I
Yeah.
actually appreciated that because they were basically making the point, this is abnormal. This should not be happening. And I
Hmm.
appreciated that and I agreed with that. And it was just coming from a more genuine place. So if people disagreed with that, they could form their opinions in a better way.
And the
So it's
ratings
weird
went
to
up.
me. Yeah, and it's weird to me that
The
Don
ratings went
Lemon
up.
is
Yeah.
now, kind of pretending like in this interview you're referencing with Elon Musk that he kind of pretends he's this neutral party. Like, come on, Don. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think CNN, they did have a clear anti-Trump bias in the 2016 to 2020 time period. One of their downfalls was they still tried to some degree to pretend to be neutral. They tried to say, "Oh, we're just objective. It's just Trump is committing atrocities,"
mm,
and some of those, in some cases, and Glenn Greenwald did the best reporting on this. And I say this despite the fact that I loathe Donald Trump's policies, and I think he's. Man, I don't think anybody's a terrible human being, but to the extent there is a terrible human being on this planet, it's probably Donald Trump. I mean, the guy does all sorts of awful
yeah,
things to human beings and to animals, for the record. I mean, he had awful policies for animals. His entire family, they go around like hunting endangered species because they're so rich. I don't know if you heard about this. I think it was Don Trump Jr. just went
yeah,
to
yeah.
Mongolia and just like paid $1 million to kill some endangered animals. Like, who does that? Who like goes to Mongolia, pays a
Spoiled
bunch of money
brat
just to
kids
kill
do that.
endangered animals? So I'm not the biggest fan of that family. But one of the flaws of CNN was they just didn't admit it. They said, like, look, this is an anti-Trump piece that I'm doing. I have an anti-Trump perspective. The other downfall, and honestly, I think even the anti-Marxist movement should learn from this, is I think it's great for people to wear their political views on their sleeves. In fact, I think you have to be
Mhm,
honest about that. In the same way that, in the sciences now, when you publish a research report, you have to announce who your supporters are, like where your money's coming from. So people can see,
mhm.
okay, you might have a natural bias because you're being funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So when you're
Right.
studying opiates and, OxyContin or whatever it is, whatever painkillers, well, turns out you're funded by the Sackler family. So let's just be open about that so we can see why you might be publishing the results you're publishing. But the thing that really well-run institutions have to do is make sure they don't fall for the echo chamber, because
Yeah.
wear your political beliefs on your sleeve, but then invite people who disagree with you. And I think there's some novel ways you can think about doing this that are very decentralized. Like, I can imagine, say you're the New York Times and you have, I don't know how many subscribers they have, 2 million subscribers. Say you actually polled your subscribers and ask them who your columnist should be. I'm not saying you use that as a definitive answer as to who your columnist should be, but say 20% of your audience is Republican, 80% is Democrat. Maybe you say, like, all right, and 20% of your audience wants someone like Brett Stevens or David French, and 80% wants Ezra Klein or Nick Kristof. Try to allocate your your pieces in a way that roughly reflects the people who are your stakeholders, and even beyond that, try to really challenge your stakeholders and include at least some views that disagree with everything that everyone's saying, because otherwise you get into traps like the Holocaust, frankly, where it's not understood now, but if you're reading Eternal Treblinka, you certainly understand this. Shockingly, most Germans went along with the Holocaust. It was not this sort of thing where it was just Hitler and the Nazis. It was a widespread, publicly supported movement that led to one of the greatest human atrocities in human history. And we know that human beings are capable of this, and every generation has inflicted this sort of atrocity on other human beings. We should be asking ourselves, what atrocity are we inflicting on a vulnerable population today? And if you don't have an answer to that question, you're just not paying attention to history.
Right. I mean, we should be willing to admit that we all do this. Like, we're all doing it because, I mean, this chapter is talking about the Holocaust, but it's also talking about throughout history how we've dehumanized, and I should say depersoned people, because
depersonified,
depersonified, because animals, like taking someone down to the level of an animal to me is like a compliment. Like, animals are beautiful. But they were talking about how, so we did this to the Japanese, right, before we bombed them. The Japanese did that to the Chinese. We're all doing it, so we're all dehumanizing, depersonifying everybody. And I wanted to bring this film up, this Zone of Interest movie that I just watched. It's the movie that won the best foreign film in the Oscars. And it's a great film. Everybody should watch it. And it's about this Nazi who is basically built his home right next to Auschwitz. And it's a true story. Like, he lived there, raised his family with like a swimming pool and a garden. And so the film is watching this juxtaposition of this beautiful family home with the sound. And it's told mostly through sound, because everything's happening on the other side of the wall. Literally on the other side of the wall is Auschwitz. So you're hearing screaming and dogs barking and gunshots and it's like kids playing. And I don't think the filmmakers intended this as a commentary on animal rights, but to me, it's a perfect commentary on what we do to animals. Perfect. This could be the greatest animal rights film ever made, without in any way intending to be, and with no mention of it, because it is exactly what we do to animals. We live our, comfortable lives, while on the other side of the wall, there's this horrific thing happening that we're mostly ignoring. Either through ignorance or willful ignorance. It's either way, neither is okay. It would be understandable if people don't know. But like I said, then when people are confronted with a film like Dominion, when I post on Daily Kos, the response is not curiosity. What's this about? What's this guy posting about? It's rejection. Don't show me my own ugliness. And I don't know, like, why. My question to you is, like, why do you think, I think I know the answer, actually. I think I know what you're going to say. But why do you think we have been willing to confront our own ugliness?
What do you mean by we?
You and I. Like, why do you think, like, yeah.
You want to know my honest answer with respect to myself?
Yeah.
So part of the answer is, sorry if this is kind of dark, I just hated myself for much of my life.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
I really did just hate myself for so long. I mean, I don't anymore. And I'm thankful to the animals for teaching me that, because part of the reason I don't hate myself is because I met animals who love me. And I trust them. I just say, well, I might feel like a piece of shit, but Oliver, I mean, you see how Oliver reacts to me. And it's just, when you have someone you love so much, you trust so much, who clearly loves you so unconditionally, it's hard to feel that bad about yourself, right? It's kind of an amazing feeling to have Oliver in your life.
It is so beautiful and also heartbreaking, because, I love Oliver and I love playing with Oliver, but Oliver will not play if you're not in the room. Like, he is so stressed out if you're not there. He's just waiting for you. It's just, so But the reason I ask that, I feel like it requires some kind of humility, like some kind of it's almost like we have to be taken down a peg, like, so
Yeah.
for me, I had lost my job, I had lost my girlfriend, and then I was confronted with animals
Yeah.
suffering, and I was able to take it in. And you've told this story many times, so I won't ask you to repeat it because it's going to be on your podcast many times. But when you first entered a slaughterhouse, you were at a
Yeah.
point of like complete like desperation.
For
You
sure.
thought your life was over. So you said,
Hmm.
what have I got to lose? I'm going to go in there and rescue an animal and do one good thing with my life. Like, why does it have to take this level for us to get there? Like this level of, and it doesn't for everybody. I'm just saying, I think I think that's informative,
Yeah.
as to why we're struggling so hard to get it through to people. Like it takes a jolt, like a major jolt of some kind. Um, and that brings us to why I think the work you're doing is valuable. I hate to keep referencing interviews that I don't know when they're going to air, but you were talking to Jeremy Beckham,
Yeah.
and you guys were talking about just what's great is just having the audacity to think big and just to
Yeah.
see the world for what it could be and to act accordingly. I mean, I feel like the mistake we make as animal rights activists a lot. I mean, we do this all the time. Is this a Holocaust or isn't it a Holocaust? Well,
Hmm.
if it is, we're not acting like it is. I
Yeah.
mean,
You're right.
even you and me, like we're doing
I
a
agree.
lot, but we're not doing everything we could. I mean, and that's really hard. And that's where you get into this feeling of guilt and this weight of responsibility that I don't want to share. There's a member of our team that shared something so powerful. I don't want to say their name because I don't know if they want this known, but they were talking about feeling like they had lost what they had to give for the animals, and they were in tears. And
Mm.
uh, this is such a compassionate person, and they were just feeling like they had like given everything and they had nothing left.
Mm.
And it's really powerful to me that somebody who cares so much just feels such a weight of responsibility that to even just like take some time to get my head right, or you know
Hmm.
you feel like you're letting someone down, and you are. Like it's
Yeah.
true, and it's an impossible situation that we're in. um
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know,
Well,
that was a long
and
little
this
rant.
is, it's important rant though, and I haven't seen Zone of Interest, but I've heard about it. I've read about it. Obviously, Jonathan Glazer gave that speech at the Oscars, which got a lot of flack because he was talking about Gaza. And I know you don't want to talk about Gaza, so we won't talk about
Don't
Gaza.
talk about
But
gods.
I actually just Googled to see if Jonathan Glazer is vegan, and I can't find anything about it. But it wouldn't surprise me if he is. As hard as it is to live near something like a concentration camp, and I'm sure that movie illustrates the tensions and the weird cognitive dissonance you have to engage in to be adjacent to something so awful unfolding right in your own neighborhood. But to start recognizing it and realizing that's what it is, that it is an atrocity. I mean, Ezra Klein has described it as taking the green pill. Like once you take the green pill, everywhere you look, the world changes and becomes very, very dark.
Yeah.
It suddenly becomes a little scary, even frightening. I mean, just you think about the violence. I mean, even going to a grocery store, when you realize there is a good chance that 5% of the chicken nuggets and 5% of these things we call drumsticks came from a living being who went into a scalding tank fully conscious, screaming in agony as boiling hot water is going into her ears, down her throat, into her eyes. She's
Hmm.
being burned and boiled alive from the inside out. And this is the result of that. I
Yeah.
mean, you go into a grocery store and you're thinking that suddenly the world becomes a very dark place. But this is why this YouTube channel and what we're doing is so important, because I think the solution to that is direct action, is rescue. Like
Hmm.
what do you need to do when an animal is being scalded alive? You take her off the line and you take her home. You give her the freedom she deserved. You
Yeah.
stop that slaughter line. Like I you heard in the trial in Sonoma County that strategically and tactically, I am not the biggest fan of what happened at Reichert. duck farm where an activist literally locked their necks to a slaughter line.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, from a moral perspective and from a spiritual perspective, that action was fucking righteous, because that is the
Yes.
sort of commitment we need. Maybe it wasn't the exact right tactic, but one of the reasons I haven't come out publicly to criticize it is because even if it was wrong in some tactical way, it was right where it mattered most, which is in our hearts. And if your heart is actually with the animals, even if it's 1% with the animals, I mean, it's funny because there's all these effective altruist utilitarian types who do all these weird mathematical calculations about the most important moral issues of our day. And one of the things they point out is, even if you think animals are 1/100th the value of human beings, we should probably be spending virtually all of our philanthropic money and time on animals because of the scale and the severity of the animal suffering. So even if they're just 1/100th of a human being, 1/1000th, I mean, frankly, it almost doesn't matter what scale. Even if it's 1/1,000,000th, it still becomes an atrocity, because you multiply that by billions and billions of animals, and that's just the animals we can find in factory farms and slaughterhouses. It doesn't even account for the hundreds of quadrillions of animals in the wild whose homes are being burned or being suffocated because of deoxygenation of oceans. All the atrocities we're committing against animals everywhere on the planet. You know, scientists call this the sixth mass extinction. I almost think the better word for it is the sixth mass extermination, or maybe not the sixth mass extermination, the first mass extermination, because the 5 prior extinctions, both in the speed and the scale of the suffering and death, were far slower. This is the fastest elimination of animals on the face of the planet in the Earth's history, and is the first one that is intentional. It is not just an extinction, it is an extermination of life on this planet. And I think the antidote to all of this is just taking action to stop it. Because once we start taking action to stop this, and this happened to me in 2007 when I walked into a slaughterhouse for the first time and realized, damn, I could just take these animals out. Why have I been crying about this and complaining about this and saying, won't someone save the animals, when I could have saved the animals myself? Like, literally, I just walked in and I was completely incompetent. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had no training. There was no open rescue training in 2007. No one knew what the hell they were doing. But all it took was, like, honestly, a guy who was, I basically fallen to a point where I didn't give a damn about anything else. And I was desperate enough that I thought, I'll just do this. And then I realized, and I actually have immense power. If I've said this so many times, if I had one other person with me that day, we probably could have saved every single one of those lambs. Now, granted, I mean, we wouldn't have had sanctuaries and cars to save them all, but we could have taken them all out. And the only reason I didn't save a lamb that day was because turns out lambs are 120-pound animals that are really fast, and I couldn't catch one. Like, speaking of cold jokes, like I'm sure the scene was actually kind of hilarious that day, because, and I have rescued many other animals from slaughterhouses, but the way to get out of this darkness and to confront the atrocity without having it eat us alive from the inside out, eat us too, is by taking action. You just got to help. And then once you help, suddenly all these dark things, they almost feel like opportunities. They feel like, all right, there's like awful stuff happening in the world, but I can do something about it, And that's an amazing feeling. So the big question for me is, why aren't people doing this? Like, I want to see more people going through that transformation I went through in 2007.
Yeah, it takes something. It takes, I don't know, like, part of it is just like trying to feel what they're feeling. So I had this experience. I hike a lot, and I'll hike at night. I usually don't. I'm not someone who gets scared very easily. But one time I went out and I was hiking alone, and it had gotten really dark, and it was the middle of the night, I guess. Basically, and there was just something in the air. There was something sinister. I felt it. Okay, I was like hearing like whistling nearby. I just felt very surrounded by someone. So I was rushing to get back, walking through the woods with my little flashlight, and I just felt danger on all sides of me. And that was like abject terror that I've never felt before, to the point where, like, when I got back home and everything was okay, like, I was exhausted from the terror that I had felt. Like, it was just, that's happening to animals all the time right now. And it's real. That was probably a perceived threat from me that wasn't actually there. But they're actually, it's happening to them. I mean, when I'll watch like Earthlings or Dominion slaughter footage, just horrific footage, and like it's horrible to watch, and it will change you, but it is still very, very difficult to imagine what they're feeling and thinking.
Yeah.
Like, and to try to get closer to that without killing yourself, like without completely burning yourself down. I think that's kind of what it takes.
Yeah.
Just to, and I talk about this with a friend of mine a lot. Like, this needs to be treated like the emergency that it is, because it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I made the point that, is this a Holocaust or not? And if it is, why aren't we treating it like one? And it is fear. Like, fear is part of it. We're afraid of how the state is going to come down on us, or, whatever. And, but, I don't know. I feel like it's the other thing that I will say that is a barrier. And I feel this a lot. Is just, I feel like I'm causing harm to my loved ones just by,
Yeah.
possibly being, just proximity, you know, proximity to animals being helped. It just seems
Mhm.
they don't understand this, like, so the people that don't understand, I mean, actually, one of the great speeches that I heard you give was the one you did in Wisconsin, where you talked about the conversation you had with your dad.
Mhm.
And your dad was asking you, why take the deal, why are you doing this? And
Mhm.
you said, I have to go, and expose what's happening to these dogs. That's something that our families don't understand, and it's causing them harm. So reckoning with, like, the fact that we're trying to end this horrific situation happening with animals and being up against it. I mean, to put it
Yeah.
mildly, um, but also dealing with the actual harm that it causes to others in the process. I don't know. That's just something that to me is really hard to grapple with.
Yeah.
And I think to others, it's also like, the personal loss, the personal, um, it is a sacrifice of some sort.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
Even
you
just
just
being
made
vegan.
me realize.
Yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just even being vegan is a
Vegan is,
sacrifice of
yeah.
sorts. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You just made me realize another just biographic factor that probably led me down the path to rescue. And that is, I haven't talked about this that much, that I was pretty estranged from my family when I walked into a slaughterhouse for the
Hmm.
first time. And that's one of the reasons I didn't have support and I felt so desperate because, my family my entire life had, it's funny. I went from being kind of this is probably an offensive phrase, so maybe I shouldn't even use it. But the phrase I was going to use is ugly stepchild, even though I wasn't the stepchild. I meant metaphorically the ugly stepchild, in the sense that my sister was a very good student. She was like the top student in my school, and she was very studious. And in Chinese culture, effort means so much, and discipline. Like my
Hmm.
sister was extremely disciplined in a way that I was not when I was a kid. Like I always wanted to read novels and run around in the backyard and play with animals. Um, and then later in life, though, when especially went to college, partly because I had a terrible experience in high school and got pretty viciously assaulted, and then went to college early, I suddenly became the star of the family, and that was great for the family because I'm the firstborn son of the firstborn son of the firstborn son. So everyone in the family is really happy that this kid we thought was out of control, and not out of control. I was a very, very well behaved kid, but I just wasn't focused the way my sister was, and I didn't. I got extremely good grades, but I wasn't a 4.0 like my sister. My sister was just a
Hmm.
4.0, But I got to college and it turned out I became the star of the family again because I did extraordinarily well in college and got into all these fancy schools and won all these awards. But then by the time I got to Northwestern, I was basically telling my family, look, this pathway everyone has decided on for me, that I'm going to be an academic, that I'm going to live up to the potential. Because especially my dad's side of the family, a lot of people are academics and all went to fancy schools in China and Taiwan. And they just expected me to follow in those footsteps. And especially my great grandfather was the dean of a very prominent university. I think it was
Hmm.
Nanjing University. So one of the top universities in China. He was like a very high level
Yeah.
scholar and official. Um, and so at that point, like my family was kind of like, what's wrong with this kid? You know, he's living the life that we've all fought so hard to give him, you know,
Yeah.
that we spent so much money and time. I mean, the number of times the mom sat down with me and taught me things the far
Hmm.
before. I mean, she was the best teacher I ever had. And she invested so much time. My life and my future were the only thing she cared about. Like everything she
Hmm.
did was for us. And then when I started telling them, look, and I knew this pretty quickly when I started my job at Northwestern, I knew I'm not I'm not digging this. This is not me. I come into work every day. I don't even know what the hell's going on. No one gives a damn what I'm writing about. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
I had so much less enthusiasm. It was really weird because I had so much more enthusiasm when I was a student than when I was a teacher. And it
Hmm.
was partly because, I mean, honestly, when you're in a law school, the students don't really care. They just want to get good grades and get money. I mean, they don't care about what you're teaching them. And but it was a dreadful experience. And so I was pretty estranged from my family. And I think that's one of the reasons I felt so depressed because I had no support. I didn't have any friends, and it led me down the path to a slaughterhouse. But you're also making me think that we have to think hard about how we can create a culture where people do honor this work. And part of it is just getting the media attention, like getting in the New York Times of the Smithfield trial, you know, getting
Hmm.
on NPR. And that was an extremely positive piece that you placed in NPR before the North Carolina trial. All those things are really important. But if you look at the civil rights movement, for example, in the Freedom Summer, when a bunch of kids, including a lot of white kids, went down to the South to register black people to vote and other people of color, it was extremely dangerous.
Hmm.
People were getting murdered by the police. You know, like
Yeah.
three of the first few activists who went down to Mississippi to start registering people to vote got firebombed and murdered with the police supporting it. They're just
Hmm.
watching this
Hmm.
mob of people. This is completely lawless activity. And but back then, it just again, everyone just thought like this is the way things are, and so we're just going to allow these people to be murdered. But across the country, especially in the North and especially in more progressive families, there was a sense like the risk is worth it. And we need to support these young people in doing what they believe is right. And that's
Yeah.
not the way animal rights or really much activism is today.
Hmm.
I think there's this sense of risk aversion and safety. Like
Hmm.
parents today are so obsessed with trying to keep their kids safe instead of finding purpose for their children. That the thing that all and one of the deep ironies about this is the only way you're actually going to keep not just your kids but all kids safe is
Hmm.
for them to find true meaning and purpose, because that
Yeah.
is the thing that ultimately made me not afraid of walking to slaughterhouses and getting prosecuted and all the things I'm doing is a deep sense of purpose. And the thing that has defeated me the most over the last couple of years, and I'm probably in the weakest state I've been in like 15, 20 years, is when I don't feel that sense of purpose. So
Yeah.
when I am doing rescues, when I feel like I'm helping the people around me I care most about, that is when I'm the least afraid. And I can walk through walls at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So
Our
so I have to think hard about that.
parents, I think our families are somewhat similar. Like our
Mm,
parents worked really hard to give us a life that was comfortable,
hmm.
and they sacrificed a lot for us, and they had this
Yeah,
vision for us. And we're not following the vision that
fulfilling it.
they, yeah.
Yeah.
And like my father worked hard every day, and he would, sometimes, not like his job. Um, he worked so that I had the privilege, basically, to, if I didn't like my, if I don't like my job, I can switch jobs or something. That's not a privilege that everybody has, but they don't understand that. So, like,
Yeah.
if I'm in a radio station yelling at my boss, that's a very reckless thing to do.
Mhm.
But to me, it was worth it. But to someone like my family, to me, the bigger picture is more important. To my
Yeah.
family, it's like, what are you doing? Like, they used to be, by the way, they were so proud of me because they
Mm,
would hear me on the radio. Their friends would call them and say, "Oh, we heard your son." I mean, it's just like
mhm.
that filled them with pride, I'm sure.
Why? Yeah.
And now, they just don't understand. Now, granted,
Yeah.
they probably didn't understand. I actually spent quite a while just playing piano on the street, busking,
Mhm.
where I was finding good meaning in that, and
Yeah.
fulfillment. But it was very untraditional, and they didn't understand that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I there aren't many people who come from like the think the background that you and I have is somewhat unique, because I think a lot of people um, who are willing to go these great lengths um, maybe come from a more broken background.
Yeah.
Whereas
And
like
don't have the privileges that we had. Yeah. We
yeah,
both had
like
privileges.
we sort of broke our background. It's our,
Hmm.
we did
We
that,
broke ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and it's true, but like you said, I mean, there's more to this than
Yeah.
to me going to a job every day, um, but not changing this world. I mean, this is a crisis. It's an absolute crisis that
Yeah.
we're living through. And I was just thinking the other day, it's like part of me wishes I never learned it. I'd be so much
No.
happier. I
Happier. Yeah.
mean,
In a lot of ways. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I
You'd be happier, but your life would be less meaningful too.
it would it wouldn't.
Because you'd be
So I'm
doing dumb shit that doesn't matter. Right. So you
exactly,
got one
yeah,
life to live. Would you rather optimize just on feeling pleasure every moment of your life? Or would you
yeah,
rather
no,
optimize on doing stuff that actually matters? And I think, I mean, the
exactly,
evidence shows that when people are on their deathbeds, they always say things like, I wish I spent less time on the job and did more things that matter. Because most people's jobs are pointless and boring and stupid, you know?
yeah,
And they
yeah,
know that themselves. They come into work every day,
hmm
selling products for Amazon or like, making iPhones for Apple or whatever it is your job is. And they say to themselves when they go to sleep at night, I don't see the point, you know? Like
yeah,
it's a job and I'm surviving, but what's the point of it all? And you want
yeah,
to be able to lay on your deathbed and say there was a point to it all, you know?
yeah. I tried to make the world a better place.
Absolutely.
I just want to be a net positive than a net negative. And I mean, when you learn what happens to animals, as I did at the age of 34, that's 34 years
Years,
of
yeah.
atonement that I've got. What I need to atone for is a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, yeah. So
Well, you're doing it, man. You're doing it, man. And one way to flip that social norm and get people calling your family about your animal rights work is for us to launch your YouTube show. So you need to launch your show too. And we'll
yeah,
create
yeah.
a network of people defending animal rights in a more genuine, authentic, and real way, and specifically rescue work. Um, but speaking of the work you've done with us over the last couple of years, you've now been physically present at two very important trials, and you were
Yeah.
going to be my team member sitting next to me at the Ridglan trial, but the charges were dismissed. Sadly for both of us. I
hmm
mean, as weird as it is to say,
Honestly,
it
yeah,
was, it was
it's
actually extremely upsetting. I think you saw this because you were in the Airbnb when we found out the charges were dismissed, and I was
mhm.
pissed. I was not happy about it.
No,
But
nobody was.
nobody
I
was. Yeah,
mean,
we were
it
all
was
disappointed and frustrated.
it was pretty somber. I mean,
Yeah,
there was so much work that was going in, and we felt so good about our position
we
going
did.
in.
Yeah.
And and I say that knowing that you were risking years in prison,
Hmm.
maximum 16 years. I don't think you would have served that, but you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weird because I wanted you to face that trial, because it was for
Yeah.
the dogs. But I didn't want you to go to prison. But yeah, that was. But yes, yeah, I've been there now for several very historic trials in my view, and it's been really fascinating.
So tell us what are the highlights and lowlights. Start with North Carolina. What do you remember from the North Carolina trial? Because you were there, you were physically present. You were actually giving me a lot of comms advice just behind the scenes. And that's how I first met you. I was like, this guy's
mm,
smart and has a lot of good and interesting feedback about how to approach this from a comms perspective, from a political perspective, from a narrative perspective. So what do you remember from that trial?
Well, first of all, like I just remember sitting there and I'm thinking, like I just want to win. I want
Mm.
us to win this. And so one thing I saw is like we've got this Chinese guy, Berkeley, Chinese Berkeley animal rights activist in rural North Carolina trying to convince a
Transylvania
jury,
County. Literally, it's
Transylvania
called
County.
Transylvania.
Yeah, I mean it's like 30 minutes from Asheville, which you might have done pretty well in, but we'll see. I
Uh-huh.
mean, who knows. But so I'm just like, how can I help? And one of the things that I was like, I'm like, you don't have the context of North Carolina. One of the jurors had mentioned boar's head, I think.
Hmm.
Like I'm like, you know what? That's like a cheese. I don't know what they do, but I
Hmm.
know it's animal based. I'm like, Wayne's not going to know what the hell boar's head is. So I made sure I may let you know this
I remember you
potential
telling me, yeah.
jurors. Yeah. So I was just
And we
sitting in the
struck him, right?
audience.
I think we struck him.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, we
You
struck
used
that
one of
guy.
your
Yeah.
you used one of your peremptory strikes on him. And so for me, the highlight was just kind of watching someone face the system down as you
Yeah.
did. And I was in awe of,
Hmm.
and I'm not trying to, butter you up, but
Mm-hmm.
it was incredible. Like your confidence, your eloquence, you spoke so forcefully for the animals. And I was really proud because I was like, this guy is representing me, our movement,
Mm-hmm.
in such a great way. And so I just wanted to be of assistance. So in North Carolina, I just remember sitting in the audience every day and kind of talking to people while we waited outside. I remember how nice and kind the police were to
Mm-hmm.
us. I remember that. I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
So I just, and I remember the heartbreak of you losing the case. Like you were
Mm-hmm.
convicted, and the most enduring memory. And I said this. I gave that speak out in Wisconsin. I said the most powerful moment to me was when you cried. You were very brave and stoic, but when we were in someone's house, some Airbnb or something, and it was like, I guess
We were
you had
waiting for the deliberation, I think, for the verdict, I think, right?
something, yeah, something. I can't remember like exactly the timing, but it didn't seem positive or something. And you mentioned being separated from Oliver, and now I've seen this so many times from you. Basically, like every time you've mentioned that, you break up a little bit. And I
Yeah.
was like, now I'm seeing like behind the facade of, I mean, not that it's a false facade. You're a very strong person, but I'm seeing like who Wayne is. And um, yeah,
Yeah.
it was heartbreaking.
Oliver's suffered so much in his life. And whenever I think about him suffering more, it tears me up. And I mean, the thing that helps me, because you're right. I mean, anybody who knows, like me and Oliver, knows how close our bond is, just how much joy we both get from being in each other's presence. And this is something the animals
Yeah,
teach us, just the power of love and of compassion, and of care, because he cares for me and I care for him. But it's hard, with my dad and Oliver especially, because I just know there's a hole in their lives when I'm not there. I mean, the thing that helps fill that hole is I know that there are other people in his life that he loves.
yeah.
Not many, but there are a few. I mean, Priya is one of them, and I know he's going to go with Priya, and
Mhm.
he'll be happy and safe. But yeah, I mean, even for me to think about it now, like he's in the other room in this office right now, and this is making me kind of sad and making me think, oh, I need to bring him over because
Mhm,
he does.
mhm.
I mean, he's not scared in the office because he's pretty familiar with this place, but he does feel this hole in his heart when he's not with me, and I feel the same. I mean, the jail for me wasn't that hard, except when I thought about Oliver, and because
Yeah.
I mean, partly because you're just trying to survive every day and eating another peanut butter sandwich and doing push-ups and trying to figure out why the hell someone's
Mhm,
screaming in the cell next door. But
mhm.
when I thought about Oliver, it was hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every time you leave Oliver, like Oliver doesn't know what's happening.
Yeah. When I'm coming
He
back.
doesn't know. Like he gets a sense that you're leaving, but he has no way of knowing when you're going to be back. And so, yeah, it's really hard. And remember, we made this video with Oliver before we went to Ridglan, and it was basically I loved it. And then
Hmm.
we were looking at the metrics on the video; it didn't do
Yes,
that
it was
well. But
terrible
I just, but
because no one
I
cares about me and Oliver. I'm just
I
kidding. I'm
know,
sure
but
some of you care about me and Oliver.
it was just so heartbreaking because Oliver definitely had a sense of what
Yeah,
was going on.
he knew what was going on.
He was very acting very different and
Hmm.
very stressed out. And by the way, I do want to say one of the things that really irked me about, and I think we'll have another conversation about things that people say about you. But one of the things that really irked me was someone suggested that Oliver was being used as a prop, and I just find that really uh, distasteful, to put it
Hmm.
mildly. Oliver's not a prop. He's a part of your life. And I feel like we should feature Oliver more because Oliver alone is he's a success. I mean, he's an inspiration. As you've mentioned many times before, you wake up next to someone who was traumatized and was facing death, and he's a constant reminder of what we're up against.
He's my little miracle. Every morning I get to wake up to a
He
miracle.
Is a miracle. And I mean, Oliver doesn't play as much as I try to get him to play a lot. I'm always like desperate for Oliver's attention.
Yeah,
as
you
you
do a
know.
good job. You do better than most. I mean, he likes you more than almost anybody other than me and Priya. Like, there are not many people who likes more than you in the world. There's just a big gap between me and Priya and everybody else.
Yeah, completely. Like he's just so stressed out. So yeah, he'll play with me sometimes, and it's just so fun. Oliver is just such a little fun guy, and I love he does this little like clawing at the ground thing. It's so funny.
He thinks he's so tough. He's like, you think I'm scared? I'll show you. And then he just claws at the ground, and then he runs away the moment you make some noise or gesture. I mean, almost anybody. He doesn't do that as much with me, but even with me, sometimes I'll make some noise or gesture that he gets a little scared and he runs off.
Yeah, no, I'll throw a ball and then he'll be running, and then some little noise happens in the corner and he's done.
He's just done. Yeah, he's like, I'm done playing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
I mean, you get that when you've seen dozens of dogs get beaten to death, which you probably saw. You're gonna. It's gonna leave you with trauma.
I mean, you can only imagine what he's seen, and well, you have some idea because you saw it yourself.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
yeah, just for context for everyone, Oliver was rescued from a dog meat farm in China.
Yes. Yeah.
A few weeks before the Yuval Dog Meat Festival in 2016, when estimates are between 20,000 and 30,000 dogs are killed, mostly by being beaten to death in 1 week in China. In one festival, one location, thousands of dogs being shipped in, including some people's stolen companions. Because you see dogs, I saw dogs with collars around their necks that suggested they had a family at some point. And I don't know if their family died or they're stolen from their family, but they die from being beaten to death and their bodies are thrown into a vat of boiling chemicals so someone can eat them at a festival in China. And that was going to be Oliver's fate.
Yeah. Having like started activism by, seeing Earthlings, that was the start. Like, I'm pretty desensitized to a lot, but one of the most upsetting things that I saw in those early days of like learning about all this was footage from Yuval, and I'm not pronouncing that right the way you pronounce it, but it was 2 dogs in a little enclosed pen, and a guy basically took a bat and beat one of them in the head. And what was most upsetting was that the other dogs saw what happened and just knew they were next, and they were basically pleading for their life, like in a very submissive position, just like, please don't, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to me? It was one of the most upsetting things that I've seen. Yeah. And obviously they didn't deserve that. It's just, yeah. So, well, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not a very angry person, and I've not intentionally struck anyone for a long time. I mean, 20 plus years. And I'm pretty calm, and, I like even people who are trying to hurt me. Even Judge Laura Pisalia, DA Bob Weiner. I mean, I think I'm the only person who liked Bob Weiner, maybe. I mean, I guess you liked him a little more than most people, but I was the only one who actually I genuinely liked him. I thought, this is a good person who's just trying to do his job. And most people are like, this guy's trying to send you to prison for rescuing animals. You're delusional. But the one moment in my life in the last 15 years that I can remember feeling hatred towards someone and genuinely wanting to hurt them was watching dogs get beaten to death every single day of my life. And one of the reasons I felt so much hatred and anger, though, was because I was just watching it. And because I was placing secret cameras all over the slaughterhouse, and I wasn't doing anything about it. But when they caught me and grabbed me, I don't know if I've told you this, but because I got caught when I retrieved the secret cameras once in like this mob of dog meat traders in the nighttime, in the middle of the night. It's kind of, I wish there were cameras there, because it was like a scene from a movie. There were all these motorcycles that were following me, and they all descended on me in the middle of the night in the market, and they jumped off and just started like assaulting me. And there's a moment when I thought to myself, this is my chance. I'm going to beat the shit out of as many. Even if I go down, I'm going to take them down too, because I've seen them hurting so many dogs. I've felt these dogs' pain. I've wanted to hurt them for what they've done, and this is my chance. It was just a fleeting moment, but it was because there is something incredibly disturbing about seeing. You're right that it's not just the beating of the dogs, seeing that they can see their other dogs who are living in fear. And I've written about
Yeah.
this. I've called it the language of fear. But when you're in a place where other sentient beings are filled with that sense of terror, you can feel it in your bones. You can smell it. You can sense it on your skin. It lands on your skin, and it's like you can feel the pheromones and chemicals and the cortisone from the stress these animals are feeling in your skin. And I was feeling that for days, day after day after day, with the animals I love most. And I didn't come that close, but I was tempted to try and hurt somebody because I was so mad.
Well,
But I didn't.
you've mentioned fear before, and just how when you see animals afraid, it makes you afraid because
It does.
you just get this sense of there's danger. Maybe I should be running. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned Wayner. I mean, in the moment, Wayner was very courteous to me.
Mm.
I mean, he was polite. But now, like, after reflecting on this for quite a bit, I just, I mean, I knew this at the time, but to me, I'm facing evil. You
Mm.
know, when it's somebody like who knows what's going on
Yeah,
and
he
is
does.
comfortable to prosecute someone who rescued animals instead of standing against that, I just feel like, um, you know, without making too bold a comparison, but I mean, it's just to me, it's like that Zone of Interest movie. It's like
Mm.
you're you're going to pretend like this is okay. You're just going to go about your day to day. Oh, Jeremy, is this your first case? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
hey Jeremy, you know, like remember it was like we had some problem with one of our drives or something, and he helped us
Mm-hmm.
out. And that was a very polite thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also performative. I should mention he did that in front of the
Yeah.
jury,
The judge
and
and the jury, yeah, to make it seem like
yeah,
they're good people.
yeah. And so I take your point. I don't think that these are deliberately bad people, but what does it matter if you're
Yeah.
doing evil? You know, whether you meant to or not. So I have a view of them as though every day we were walking in to stand up against the government, the industry, and the purveyors of this atrocity. So yeah, I didn't have like warm, bubbly feelings for any of them.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that still like you asked earlier, what are my highlights and lowlights, and that it's almost like night and day because I was part of that trial. The North Carolina one, I guess I was part of it, but I was more an audience member. Um, but yeah, it was just really interesting. So when you
Mm.
called me up and you said, "Hey, do you want to join the team?" like a day before, I mean, my thought
I think it
was,
was literally like 1 or 2 days before the trial was going to start.
yeah, it was like a weekend, and I was
Uh-huh.
there working with the press team, and I had showed up with like no suit, so I had to run over and get like to Goodwill and get a suit that didn't fit me that well, but but I've shopped secondhand, and by the way, everybody should shop secondhand because
Yeah. You're
that's
right.
the better way to be. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, but yeah, my thought was that this is just going to be really interesting, and it was,
Yeah.
and
It
it was
was.
fascinating. I, I mean, to have a front row view, and then watching as the team got whittled down.
I
I
know.
mean, the team stayed intact, but
But then she kept taking people
she
out.
kept kicking people out, and eventually it was just you and
Yeah.
me sitting there every day.
And
I
this is
had
the
a
judge. By she, we mean the judge. For
yeah,
various reasons, the judge kept basically kicking people off the legal team and kicking them out of the courtroom.
yeah, and including me at the end.
Yeah,
So I
eventually.
wasn't there for the verdict reading, and
And for completely
which
made up reasons, it didn't make any sense.
had
Just
nothing to
like,
do with me. Yeah,
yeah.
she was mad at you. She
Hmm.
wanted me out of the room so that she could berate you without a witness.
Yeah.
And I mean, she was able to do that as a judge. This was 2 days, I think, before the verdict was
The
read.
verdict.
So
Yeah.
that we were like 4 days into jury deliberation. And for me personally, I just want to say, like, none of this is about me, but
Hmm.
I wanted to be there because I didn't want you standing up there on your own
Yeah.
to face
And
that.
this is in
And
closed
you ended
court
up,
because she was closing the court to everybody. So it
yeah,
was just you and me in the courtroom most of these days because she wasn't allowing the public, which also is a problem. I mean, there's a constitutional issue with that.
yeah,
What
yeah.
was the specific reason she kicked you out again? I don't even remember. Was it the Facebook like scandal?
It was the Facebook like scandal that was like this day of crises. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that, but they had nothing to do with me.
Yeah. Had nothing
But
to do with me either. And I still got punished. We
yeah,
both got punished for something someone else did, which was a mistake. It was just an innocent mistake that Priya made. It was like not, it was so ridiculous.
I was just looking at somebody's Facebook out of just like curiosity and inadvertently liking one of their posts that had, nothing to do with anything. That juror felt threatened by that because for some
Well, he
reason
didn't
some of
actually.
these.
He said he did not.
Oh,
The judge
true.
tried to make it seem like it was a threatening gesture, but he said because if he had felt threatened, honestly, that might be grounds for a mistrial. Because if a juror is threatened, then
Yeah.
granted they convict him anyways. And that juror ended up being the juror who wrote to me and apologized in jail
Hmm. Hmm.
for convicting us and showed up at my sentencing. But
Yeah.
I mean, what happened was Priya, who was a co-defendant and therefore had access to the jury list, and in theory, all these things should be public. Like we have a public court system for a reason in this country because we've seen through history when justice is executed in the dark, it tends not to be justice. This is why we have
Yeah.
public courts. Everything's supposed to be accountable. This is why you can't have anonymous witnesses. You can't have a witness in a mask who's covering themselves up. And in
Hmm.
theory, the jury's supposed to be the same way. I mean, we want our citizens to stand behind the decisions they make. But the judge made it seem so intimidating. These terrifying animal rights activists, there's hordes of them. They're a cult of dangerous people. They're engaged in bioterrorism. Literally, Mike Weber in my sentencing said this is an act of terrorism.
Hmm.
Walking into a factory farm with flowers in our hands, with grandmothers and grandchildren at our side, and taking 38 animals to go see the vet is an act of terrorism. And the judge portrayed this like that Priya did inadvertently when she was just scrolling through the guy's Facebook page on Facebook as an act of intimidation and blame me for it, and didn't believe me when she was convinced that I put Priya up to it. And I was like, why would I do that? I mean, what is a like going to do anyways? And why would liking some random post from 7 years ago help me in any way? And also, I just don't control everyone. But she was convinced that it was some conspiracy, that I was deceiving her, that I had been lying to her repeatedly. I still remember the day in court where she said, this is earlier than the liking scandal, where she said it was about some protest that DX was organizing that I legitimately had no idea what the hell they were doing because I
Yeah.
intentionally walled myself off from all those decisions. And I said to the judge, honestly, I have no idea what they're doing. Like, I have not been in leadership in DXE for 5 years since 2019. I'm not in correspondence with them about any of their communications plans. And frankly, they have a First Amendment right to do it anyways. They have a right to
Yeah.
do what they want to do in terms of speech. And the judge's response was, Mr. Hsiung, I'm getting tired of you.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, that was extremely hostile and intense and personal in a way that, yeah, it was bizarre.
It was
It was
really
bizarre.
bizarre. She had this really intense animosity towards you. And it's weird because like the Priya Facebook like thing, she wasn't pissed. Like she was performatively mad about that. I know
Yeah, I
that.
think you're right.
But she had been, throughout the trial losing her shit. Like she was
Mhm.
she was out of control. And
Yeah.
I just don't understand why people will never believe you. Like the thing is like, yeah, after trial, you've got all these supporters supporting you. So you walk out there and you address them and just like talk a little bit. But she had this sense like you're controlling everything. Well,
Mhm.
DXC was out there to support. And on one of the days of the trial, after she disallowed all this footage of what happens to the animals, DXC very cleverly, in my view, just stood out in front of the courtroom with those photos that were being
Mhm.
disallowed. And just it was, yeah, I mean, and I guess it's to be expected that she would lose her cool about that. But
Mhm.
it still just had nothing to do with you. And that actually, I think that did result in some like major shakeup on the team. I mean, Murray had like appeared on Jane Unchained or something, but it was
Mhm.
really the tweeting and it was that. And so we were disallowed from using our computers. Luckily, I could still use mine. And that's how we were playing all of our
Yeah.
footage, which wasn't much, by the way, because every day, so it's funny, we're like 90 minutes in. Like, what the hell did I do this whole time? That my whole job was basically to handle the exhibits. So we'd have like an outline for every witness and stuff. And we were trying to show what was happening to animals. We already knew that what we could show was very limited. So we had very whittled down what we were going to show. And still, minutes before the jury would be seated, for some reason, we would have to go through this vetting process where she would just say, no, you can't allow this, can't allow that. I'll let you show this part, this little clip, but you got to take the sound out because of something that was said. I mean, just
and she'd get mad at us that she made the decision at the last minute. It's like, we have these exhibits prepared, and she'd flip out and say, like, why aren't you prepared? It's like, we were prepared, and you told us we couldn't show 90% of what we were planning to show.
And me, this like random guy, like no legal experience, coming in with these USBs that were like well prepared, and then all of a sudden having to scramble minutes before while the jury's coming in, and then we look incompetent because we're scrambling. And then, like, at the end, we had to fix all the exhibits because they were like, because of this mess,
all out of order.
they were all out of order. And, you know, we had Bob Wayner and his sidekick, I forget her name, just like
Jessa Lee
just sneering at us as we had to like try to get this all in order. It was just so stupid. I lost so much faith in the legal system. So you crushed my spirit, Wayne. You crushed me.
Same thing happened to me. The first time I was charged with a crime in 2006, I think it was, I lost enormous amount of faith in the legal system. And I still believe in a lot of the principles of our legal system, due process, equal protection of the laws. But when you see how it's actually operating, you realize, have you read any Kafka? Yeah. So
it's like Kafka.
When I read the trial, I thought, oh, this is kind of hilarious. It's kind of fiction, because the trial is about this dystopian world where the rules constantly change and you don't even know what you're being charged with. You have no idea how to defend yourself, and you're just navigating this labyrinth procedure where it's not even someone necessarily is maliciously trying to hurt you, but you just have no idea what the hell's going on. And every day you're losing a little more of your freedom.
Yeah.
And that's the way the legal system has felt to me over the last 20 years. And it is a travesty. It is an absolute travesty that we believe in principle, in things like due process of law, the rule of law, equal protection. We believe that everyone is entitled to impartial justice. That's in the Constitution of the United States. And we do not deliver. Our government fails that in fundamental ways that are embarrassingly bad.
Yeah. And the rulings that Saglia made were just absurd. For instance, allowing a mistake of law for just one aspect of the law that you were using. 597E versus necessity defense. It made no sense. If you're mistaken about one side of the law, then you could be mistaken about both. So we basically had to, and this was industry, in my opinion. Pushing. This was industry pushing. Don't let necessity in this.
Well, it's literally the memo they wrote. I mean, they literally wrote a memo about this, and then Passalia adopted their memo. And it's just, it makes no sense. I mean, we had distinguished criminal law scholars on our side, people like Kristen Stilt at Harvard, Hada Avram at UC Hastings, Bonnie Clapper, who's a very distinguished former prosecutor. Literally, people have written books about Bonnie Clapper's work. And she sides in favor of this industry hack memo that the Farm Bureau put together, and says throughout the case, oh, the Farm Bureau is not a party to this case. It doesn't matter what they think. It's like, well, you're adopting their exact perspectives. We've shown you document after document, video after video, photo after photo of the Farm Bureau actively trying to put me in prison. And you're saying that siding with them, and even jurors, there was a juror who said, yeah, I'm a member of the Farm Bureau and I take whatever position they take. And the judge said, oh, he's not biased. It's like, this is literally the primary organization that has been trying to put us in prison over the last 5 years. And you're saying he doesn't have a bias when he says he will take whatever position? I mean, that is the definition of bias. And that juror was not stricken for cause, So how are you supposed to fight in this context? I mean, honestly, I wouldn't even necessarily be against that. I'd be fine with including him, if not for the fact the judge did allow every vegan to be stricken. Like literally every vegetarian and vegan, and there were a number of them, was just removed.
Yeah,
And the prosecution didn't even have to use peremptory challenges on most of them.
that blows my mind that that's an allowed thing to do. If you have an animal rights activist on trial, you can just blanket say to any prospective juror, "Are there any vegans out here?"
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And then remove them for cause.
So by that logic, you should be able to ask, "Are there any meat eaters here?"
Yep, and remove them all.
And remove them all. Yeah, so you'd have no jury. Like, and here's another thing. So one of the things that was really sinister that I think was going on was this kind of, they were making this illusion. So Laura was trying to appear reasonable, right? By saying,
Laura's Judge
certainly,
Basalia.
yeah, Laura's, yeah, sorry. I should be
Judge
a little
Basalia.
more respectful of the title.
No, I just want to clarify. I don't care. I mean, you can respect or not, but yeah. I just want to make sure people know.
I think it warrants that. Judge Basalia. Yeah. So yeah, she would say that, yes, it's important that we show to some extent the intent of what Nguyen was doing. So in order to do that, yes, some footage will have to be shown. Some photos will have to be shown. We'll get into that, but it's going to be very limited, and it's going to be only what she decided on. So it gave the jury this sense that, you know, we were able to show what we wanted to show. We weren't. And so they got to see, we had this one clip, and we kept showing this one image of a bird who had a red eye. And it's not a good image because it does show suffering. However, I mean, if you were to see that, you would get the sense that, okay, this isn't really that bad. Okay, they went on to that farm. They found one bird with that. And we were able to show that there was a bird that had decayed on the ground. And an activist picked up the bird and showed that. So, yes, we got in a little bit, but had we been able to show what actually was happening, I mean, there was one clip, I remember it was called basically the zombie bird. And it was like probably one of the most powerful ones that we had, which just showed this incredibly malnourished looking, ill looking bird that looked like a walking zombie from The Walking Dead, on the verge of death. I mean, just in walking around looking like a corpse.
Yeah, stumbling.
Yeah, horrific. And
we couldn't show any of that.
We couldn't show it, and to me, that just shows everything. I mean, it's like I think about this when I'm like politically. I used to be like way more about politics and stuff than animal rights, right? But I was like, there's one side that's trying to keep people from voting. Okay, they're trying to put up obstacles to voting. That's all I need to know. One side doesn't want me to vote. One side says everybody should vote. You know, like,
that should be enough.
So there's one side of this that doesn't want the truth to come out. And I find it so disappointing that so many jurors can't put that together. Like Lewis was giving testimony and just mentioned that maybe it would be nice if people could actually see the rest of this video that we had to cut. And that was a
slaughterhouse video where they just basically excised all the video of the animals on the slaughter line.
Exactly.
They literally just cut it all out. Yeah.
As you mentioned, many activists had locked their necks to the slaughter line as an act of defiance, a beautiful act of defiance, I will add. And they wanted the jury to see that because that makes us look extreme, but they don't want people to see why.
Yeah.
And if they saw what's happening to animals, maybe they don't get all the way to our side, but they can at least better understand why they're doing this. And it, you know, as you've seen in your other trials that I wasn't a part of, and by the way, every trial that I have not been party to, you've won. So I don't know why you wanted me back, but so
because we win by losing, my friend. We're going to find out a couple of years from now when we win this appeal in Sonoma County that we win by losing.
And that is true. I mean, losing just shows the absurdity more so,
Yeah, it does.
even than winning. But I mean, though, I feel like it would be better to get the wins. But as you've seen in your trial in Utah, um, actually, you didn't get to show a lot of the footage, right? And actually, that was one of
No.
the things that the jury said, though, is like that jury, for
Yeah, they
some
noticed
reason,
it. They figured it out.
they figured out that this is being hidden from us, and they didn't like that.
Yeah. It was a really smart jury. There were a bunch of engineers, really intelligent people. There was like a
Mhm.
microbiologist, a civil engineer, a veterinary, or no, a dentist, I think. I mean, just
Yeah,
extremely well educated, smart people who could kind of see through the tricks the prosecution was trying to play.
yeah,
The prosecutors also were just less skilled. I think Bob Weiner did a reasonably skillful job of trying to seem like a straightforward, transparent person. And the judge, I mean, the judge in Utah disliked me, but he didn't have the intense enmity that Judge Basalia had. And Judge Wilcox
yeah.
was mostly just annoyed with me, and he wanted me in prison. I mean, he said as much before the trial, so it's not like he was on my side, but he didn't have the intense enmity that Judge Basalia had.
Yeah. I thought
One thing I want to note about this evidence stuff, though, have you been following the Trump trial at all?
I a little bit. Yeah,
A little bit. Yeah.
I
Did you
read
hear
about
about the
it.
condom question?
No, I didn't hear that.
So this is an example of how skewed the legal system is. Because, the judge in our case was literally not allowing us to show the footage of what we actually did at the farm. We couldn't even show what we did.
Right.
In Trump's case, right? And I'm not saying I'm sympathetic to Trump, but it just shows you how skewed justice operates and also how normally evidence operates in court. So Trump is charged with falsifying business records, right? That's the legal charge. And the only evidence that should be submitted is whether he falsified business records, whether he lied about a particular payment that he made to Michael Cohen, his lawyer, in order to cover up that he was trying to hide a sex scandal. And during the examination of Stormy Daniels, the woman who he had an affair with, allegedly, and he covered up, and it seems like he probably did. I have no idea. The lawyers literally asked her, did Trump wear a condom when you had sex to make Trump look bad? And this is objected to. And the judge overruled the objection and said, no, she's allowed to talk about this. And what that shows is, first of all, typically it's the prosecution that wants to get evidence in, right? They want
Yeah.
every single detail, even a lurid detail that has absolutely nothing to do with the actual charge. And secondly, that the system isn't a fair one, because when defendants want evidence in, we don't get it in. But when defendants are objecting to evidence, even when it's completely inflammatory, because what they were trying to throw on this, I mean, honestly, it may be sympathetic to Trump, which is hard to do, but I was kind of infuriated. But it just shows you how skewed and how broken our legal system is when judges are making these calls just based on their political beliefs and their biases. And
Yeah.
this judge probably doesn't like Trump and thinks he's a scumbag. And so the fact that he didn't wear a condom when he was married to someone else and had just had a child, he wanted the jury to hear it. And so this irrelevant fact that he didn't wear a condom before having sex suddenly gets it introduced. While in my case, when the literal actions that we took are not allowed to be introduced, and that's considered, oh, this is too prejudicial, this is too emotional, it's extraneous, it's inflammatory. It's like,
Yeah.
there's something broken in the system right now. There's something completely broken in the system. And whether you're on the right or the left, whether you're a president or an animal rights activist, I mean, I felt badly for Trump in that context because I thought this is pretty messed up. And I don't know.
Well,
I honestly, I personally think the entire business records thing, it's such a stupid case. And I have no idea why they're pursuing it, because there's so many awful things this guy did. And pursuing this dumb case is undermining the actual political objections and legal objections to Trump's behavior. But we'll see where this trial goes.
The only thing about that where I disagree is that I think that more information is generally better than less information. So for them to know a fact, while it may be a prejudicial fact, if it's still a fact, it's a fact. I understand that what you present, but I want to say this about Sonoma.
Yeah, I'm not even saying I disagree with the judge's decision in Trump's trial. I just think it's pretty interesting that in Trump's trial, when the prosecution wants inflammatory evidence in, everything goes. And in our case, when the defense wants potentially inflammatory evidence in, nothing goes. Like we get literally almost nothing in. That is not fair, and that's not right.
Yeah, and one of the most insidious things that I think that Pisaglia did was to disallow us showing things outside of a certain time frame. So
Hmm.
these particular farms had been investigated in like
For 2 years.
2017 for 2 years.
Hmm.
Like there was a Mercy for Animals investigation. We couldn't talk about it. Several years later, there was a DXC investigation. Couldn't talk about
Couldn't
that.
talk about it.
We couldn't talk about the fact that there was a further follow-up investigation. And what that is
And that
doing.
we had reported this to the authorities repeatedly and
Yes.
begged the authorities to do something themselves.
And why that was not relevant to establish this is a pattern. It's happening
Hmm.
year after year. The situation is not changing. So we couldn't show that it was a pattern, which means that you had a reasonable assumption that this is still going on at the farm. And it was. When you got to the farm, you
That's
documented
exactly
the
what we found.
conditions. That's
Yeah.
what you found. And she said, you can't show what you found on the farm because that doesn't speak to your intent. You didn't know what you would find on the farm when you went in there. So it's irrelevant. The fact that you were proven right, she even said this, for you to be proven right or wrong is irrelevant. And
Yeah.
and it's important to note you were proven right. And
Yeah.
we couldn't show that to the
So we can show
jury.
the jury that we were right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
No, you're right. That's kind of insidious. I agree.
well, and I mean the more important thing, and I almost can somewhat agree with her point that what was proven on the day may be less relevant than the years of investigations
Investigations. Yeah.
establishing the pattern.
But we got
Yeah.
to show neither.
Neither. Yeah, just nothing.
Yeah. We got
And
to
then
show
they
nothing.
and then they convicted you of trespass for
Yeah.
what? Like reaching, like you were like literally on the
Pointing.
outside. This is the Reichardt demonstration where you never entered the property.
Yeah.
Like if you were even on the property at all, and I remember them asking Lewis about this, like, do you consider this part? We're talking about the driveway, the
Mhm.
outside, and they asked Lewis, and Lewis like, do you consider this property? Lewis responded that maybe where if I was driving, I might turn around. You
Mhm.
know, basically saying there was some
Yeah.
room for you to turn.
Sure.
That's where you were. And
Yeah.
they convicted. It's just so disappointing to me that they convicted you of
Yeah.
trespass.
I was pretty. Yeah, it was ridiculous that they convicted me of trespass and record, but it was really funny to me, honestly, when Jesse Lee and Bob Weiner, Jesse Lee Mills was one of the district attorneys who was
Yeah,
doing a lot of the Reichardt stuff. She was kind of owning Reichardt. Bob Weiner was owning Sunrise, and she kept emphasizing, "Look at him pointing.
yeah.
He keeps pointing at stuff." It's like
I think
I didn't realize pointing is a crime in this country. You know,
I
like
think maybe because
is
your
pointing now
arm
a felony?
crossed. Here's the
Yeah.
barrier. Your arm went like that. You
Yeah, my
pointed.
arm crossed the barrier of the property, and so he keeps pointing. He's pointing like that's such a, and it's I don't even remember what the hell I was pointing at, but for some reason, pointing became this incredibly dangerous criminal act, which just pointed out the absurdity of the
Oh my
entire
God.
case. All right, we've been going almost 2 hours. What do you
Yeah.
think? One thing I want to say, because you hear about all this nonsense, and it might feel very defeating,
Yeah.
but the reality is, if we win this appeal, it'll be a transformative victory for animal rights. And even if we don't and I remain convicted, there was so much media attention around this case and so many people who stepped up in the weeks and months afterwards, even to this day, journalists, politicians, ordinary people all over the world who see that when we're willing to sacrifice, and you even see this at the Gaza protests now. I know you don't want to get into Gaza, but the fact that so many students are willing to get arrested is a huge part of the reason so many people are paying attention to the issue.
Mhm.
So the flip side of all this nonsense is the fact that we were willing to deal with so much insidious nonsense gave us enormous credibility with the public at large. And that is one of the keys to going into these sorts of actions, understanding, yes, you're going to have to deal with all this nonsense. And that is precisely why the activism is powerful. Because when you face off with the dragon, and not the good dragon, like not a happy, hero dragon, but like the evil villainous dragon who's trying to eat everyone alive, there's something about that action that does inspire people. And I think we should remember that. But so let me just end by saying this. Has there been a moment in any of these recent trials that really inspired you and that fired you up? That made you think like, all right, there's something important happening here?
Yes, well, many, many things, but I'll point to this one. When we were about to get the Ridglan trial going, and we were going to it was the morning we were going to argue personhood for animals the morning the charges were dropped. We learned hours before, so we still had the hearing to go to. We went to the hearing, and there was the assistant district attorney, or I think that's what the attorney, the assistant district attorney was sitting there, and it was your speech that was really powerful for me. And I think what's powerful to me is because you are someone who's pretty measured, and you almost lost your cool a little bit in a very powerful way, because you just, I was so proud because you represented us so well. You said, your voice was rising. You said, this has to stop. This has to stop. In talking about what's happening to the dogs and the cover up that is being perpetrated, and the fact that they won't go after the criminal animal abuse, but they will go after the compassionate people who are just willing to risk everything. And I just I want to emphasize risk. I think this is important to point out. If, as you pointed out in your talk with your dad, in your speech about your talk with your dad, for you to go into prison for any length of time could be the last time that you see your family or your dad. It's just reality. So you might not lose your life. You might not go to prison for 16 years, but you could lose everything that matters to you. You could lose Oliver. You're risking a lot. And so it's just incomprehensible to me. And it's so outrageous that prosecutors are going after people like you and just ignoring. Like, there's ample evidence. We've tried so hard. You've been doing it for years. I've watched you do it now for the past 2 years of just trying to go to the authorities and say, just please do something about this. Why do we have to make these grand gestures? Why do we have to go through trials to get you to do something? We have to bring 20 supporters to get an investigator to come out. I'm talking about, you were trying to present the evidence.
Yeah.
And
Ryan Greeno was the guy's name. Ryan Greeno.
And the district attorney didn't have the courage to come and face you himself. Of course he didn't. And I remember I was watching, I wasn't present for this, but during this special prosecutor hearing, he was there. And you mentioned that you tried to speak to him. And he said, no, I won't speak to you. Yeah. Well, you're here to watch this happen, but you won't talk to it. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And look, this guy could be wary of political theater. He could be wary of being made into a spectacle, anything like that. He could have said to you, let's go into my office. Let's have a chat.
Yeah.
That's what you were asking for. I'm pretty much. Let's talk about this. It is such a dereliction of their duty. That they have such privilege. And when I gave that speak out, I was trying to point to the courthouse behind me. I was saying, these people here have such power and privilege to do something about what's happening to these dogs, and they do nothing, absolutely nothing. And so that to me was very
speak out, by the way.
Well, thanks.
It was outside of the courthouse.
It was.
Where is it? Can people? We should put it in the show notes so people can see it. Is it up somewhere?
Yeah, it's on my social media, on my Instagram, and I added my Instagram, by the way, here. Because the idea is that I am going to attempt a YouTube channel similar to what we're doing. It's just an experiment, but I don't yet know. I've done 3 interviews, and I'm not sure yet. I want to interview you for it. And
no, I'm down. I'm down, buddy. So,
but I don't know yet. It's not in existence yet. So that's where I'll announce it if I do, do it. You got
a powerful voice, and I want to support it as much as possible. And the goal is to create a network, because I think if all the people who are speaking out for animals support each other, a rising tide lifts all ships. So we gotta build more of a base of people. And with your experience and skill from your time at NPR, I think you're a wonderful person to be doing interviews and putting out some content on animal rights, because we need people like you doing it. So
let me do one more thing, because I was telling you that I was reading this Eternal Treblinka, and Let me read a passage from this. That's the end of the
Okay.
first. This is an artist. Her name is Judy Chicago, who did like this Holocaust art installation. But this is a paragraph from the book, and this
And
is a
can I just
quote
add
from
that
her.
Jeremy is Jewish himself? So all you people who are condemning him for the Holocaust references, just know
Yeah,
Jeremy's one of the people.
my father's side is Jewish. I don't. I mean, I'm not like a practicing.
Hmm.
But yeah, ethnically, I'm Jewish. So yeah, here's a quote. I saw the whole globe symbolized at Auschwitz, and it was covered with blood. People being manipulated and used, animals being tortured in useless experiments, men hunting helpless, vulnerable creatures for the thrill, human beings ground down by inadequate housing and medical care and by not having enough to eat, men abusing women and children, people polluting the earth, filling it with poisons that foul the air, the soil, and the water, the imprisonment of dissident voices, the elimination of people of opposing political views, the oppression of those who look, feel, or act differently. To me, that's a beautiful line. And it just encapsulates what we're talking about. This is
Yeah.
a Holocaust of epic proportion. And I just want to end on that, really, because
Yeah.
the realization of that is what leads to the action. When people
Yeah. You're right.
realize that that's what we're dealing with, then they're going to find a way to get active. And I think that's the main point of our channel, right? It's to
Yeah. You're right.
inspire. It's we want people active and helping animals. And I just also want to just say thank you because you've been such a good friend to me over the years now. And
Mm.
also you've just believed in me and you've given me opportunity to help animals, which I couldn't thank you enough.
Yeah.
That's
Well, you
that's
seize
what
those
it's all about.
opportunities yourself. I've told you many times that from the first time I met you, I knew that there was something in you that was special and that was resolute in a way that I think all of us can cultivate that, but you had it, and that's important. So again, go check out Jeremy's Instagram, his YouTube show. It's going to be awesome. He'll be interviewing a different, diverse set of people, coming at it more, I'm sure, from a certainly more journalistic experience perspective. Um, but thank you for your work, my friend. And you're right, it is a Holocaust, and we got to do something about it. So let's go do it. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you, Wayne.
All right. Until next time.
All right, till next time.